Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast, coming at you on back-to-back days. I'm Zach Ewing with advocate LSU baseball beat writer Koki Riley today. We would be remiss if we did not talk about the amazing and amazingly cold, I might add, series that LSU had up in Norman, Oklahoma last weekend. So welcome into the LSU Sports Insider. Today is Tuesday, April the 8th. And Koki, you were there in Norman with the wind blowing in your face, watching LSU just not give Oklahoma any offense at all.
Yeah, it wasn't really blowing in my face as much because there was a glass window that was a couple inches thick.
Sometimes, man.
Yeah, right in front of me. So that was a lifesaver for sure, especially in the last game. But I did have to conduct all my post-game interviews outside, so I did get a little taste of the weather. And that was especially bad on Saturday, the last game. I mean, it was temperature only said it was like 41, which is pretty cold on its own. But then if you factored in the wind chill, and it gets really, really windy in the Midwest in early April, as you know, as a fellow Missourian, not fellow, but as a Missourian. Is that how you say it, Missourian?
Well, technically, I only went to school there, so I have to correct you there.
That's
but
true.
There is like a point of contention, whether it's Missouri or Missouri. It depends on what part of the state you live in. But your point is well taken because, I mean, I think if we want to frame this series, right, like LSU outscored Oklahoma 15-4, and that's 3 games.
Yeah.
In college baseball, a lot of times that's 1 game.
Yeah.
That's 3 games. They only used 5 pitchers the whole weekend. And the weather, and we're going to praise LSU's pitching a lot because it was obviously much better than Oklahoma's was. But the weather does have something to do with this, where it's hard to hit in those conditions.
I think the last game you kind of have to just throw out the window a little bit. Like, it was that bad because not only was it really windy, it was all blowing in at 15, 20 miles an hour. And so it dropped the temperature from 40 degrees to closer to something like 28, 27 degrees. And I mean, that's just you just can't really play baseball in that weather, good baseball in that weather, or hit the ball hard, hit the ball far, or anything like that. And so I think Jay Johnson said this on his radio show yesterday. And he thought to himself at one point, if we score 4 runs, we win the game. It was that extreme of conditions. And I think he told me afterwards that it was the most non-conducive for offensive baseball in terms of an environment for a game that he's been in since becoming the coach here. Wow. So it was bad.
It's actually surprising. It was 3-2. I mean, those teams scratched. But I watched the last few innings of that game, and there was a couple of balls that off the bat, the quick aside, okay, my 9-year-old son plays MLB The Show on Xbox, and every now and then I'll hear him in the game room going, "Gone!" because he hit a home run. And so he thinks he can tell every time watching a real game when a ball is gone off the bat. And so he'll go, "Gone!" And I'm like, "Jacob, that's like a 170-foot fly out to right field. That is not anywhere. You gotta watch the outfielder, right, to see how." Well, there were a couple times watching that game on Saturday where I thought the ball coming off the bat late in the inning where I thought, oh man, that ball is trouble. And then it's just a can of corn because it would just die in that wind.
Yeah, exactly. And that happened a few times this weekend. I think it was the first 2 games that sort of categorize it. It was difficult to hit the ball far, hit the ball hard. LSU did it a few times in the Friday game, which I think were probably the best conditions for offense, comparatively speaking. But every game was kind of cold. Every game was fairly windy. And for every game, the wind was blowing in from center field. It wasn't blowing out. Right, it wasn't pushing the ball over the fence. It was keeping the ball in the park, and that played just such a massive factor. But in the last game, I mean, it went from difficult to the last game impossible to hit the ball hard in the air.
And anybody who's played baseball, it hurts when you hit the ball when it's that cold. You almost are fighting instincts to hit the ball hard because it's going to jolt up your entire arm. It hurts. So not only is the wind blowing the ball down, but you're almost it's hard to get loose, and it's hard to get loose for the pitchers too. But the whole thing is just conducive to pitching. So that's the backdrop to this. But having said that, look, one team scored 4 runs, the other scored 15. So LSU's pitchers were doing something right, and we have to start with Cade Anderson, who put together. I don't know. Historically speaking, is it similar to anything Skeens did while he was here in his year here? I mean, how far back do you have to go to find And I don't think Skeens had a complete game, not a complete game shutout. How far back do you have to go to find a comparable pitching performance for LSU?
Well, the last complete game shutout they had was in 2018. So there's that. The last complete game they had was the Skeens game that you mentioned. But he gave up 2 runs in that game. I think it was a 2-run home run. Tulane somehow got. And that was in the regional. I was at that game. And then, as you mentioned earlier, they only used 5 pitchers for the entire series, and the last time they did that was in 2005 in an SEC series. So it was a historically great weekend for the pitching staff to only use 5 guys, and it kind of shows like how much. To have 5 guys who can throw 4 or 5 innings reliably is a very important thing to have, as you saw in this weekend. And after that is where the questions start for this pitching staff for sure. But we already kind of knew that. So I don't want to say it wasn't a surprise, but we knew that these 5 guys could at least do this. And if you combine that with the conditions, combine with that with the fact that Oklahoma doesn't have the most physical offense, and you kind of get somewhat with this result. But to answer your question specifically about Cade and just what he was doing so well, obviously first complete shutout since 2018, but everything was a strike. Nothing was thrown really over the middle of the plate much at all. I think he gave up 1 extra base hit in the entire game. And he just did such a good job of mixing and matching his pitches. And he had a changeup going. He had his changeup going to the outside against righties pretty well. He was able to locate the fastball inside, outside. He wasn't afraid to throw the slider in any count. He used his curveball a little bit more often than he has in his last few starts, which I think is important for him because that was his calling card pitch in terms of his off-speed stuff heading into his LSU career, and then he kind of backed away from it a little bit to start this season, but it seems like he's using a little bit more lately. So yeah, it was obviously the most complete performance that he's had, and probably the best outing of his life. And the weather had a part to do with it. The fact that Oklahoma doesn't have the greatest offense probably had a part to do with it as well. But at the end of the day, he was absolutely fantastic, and I just did not expect him to get to 135 pitches. That's the part that's probably the most surprising aspect of it to me.
And we should talk about that, but I don't want to take anything away from Cade. Yeah, Oklahoma's, is their offense the best in the SEC? No, but this is still a top 10 team, not anymore, but they were number 10 in the country coming into this series. They were obviously still getting it done. Oklahoma loaded the bases in the bottom of the first inning with 1 out. Cade Anderson, by the way, we should say the final line: 9 innings, 5 hits, 2 walks, 14 strikeouts, and all of those zeros. So Oklahoma loaded the bases with 1 out in the bottom of the first. Boom, gets out of it. And at that point, you think, okay, that's great, but he's cost himself, because we know LSU's pitching depth is kind of a question mark, right? And is anybody's 6th and 7th pitchers great? I don't know that anybody had. Maybe there's a couple teams that you could say have that kind of depth, but it's not like it's a huge problem that will prevent LSU from winning a national championship. Anything it might, but we know the first inning of a 3-game series, you don't want to see your pitcher extended like that. And so you go, well, he got out of it. Now he's got to get on a roll. And he did. And he starts mowing through Oklahoma's lineup. And you start getting into the 5th inning, 6th inning. LSU's winning 2-0. And you start to think, okay, well, they're gonna turn this over to Case and Evans or Zach Cowan, because that's what they do. Especially on these Thursday night, Friday night games, is let Cade Anderson get them into the 6th or 7th inning and then bring in the fireman who comes in and closes the door.
Yeah.
And so you kept thinking, okay, Zach Cowan's going to come in the 7th. No, Cade Anderson's going to get through the 7th. Oh, that's great. Okay, well, he's almost at 100 pitches now. Zach Cowan's going to get the 8th and the 9th. Oh, they're going to push Cade Anderson through the 8th. That's great. He's at 115 pitches or whatever he was. So Zach Cowan's only got to pitch 1 inning, and maybe he's going to pitch again this weekend. And then Cade Anderson comes out again for the 9th. I mean, it was just bulldog effort.
Yeah. Jarring, shocking, whatever you want to say. I mean, his career high before that outing was 101 pitches, and he got to 135. So he blew by it by 34 pitches. And it's not like we were in Omaha, right? Because that I could understand because you're literally playing for a national championship and you want to, and if your best pitcher's on
and
a roll like
there's
that.
no tomorrow, right? Like you're not saving him for next week or anything. Now there may be long-term, and I have to say, as a younger journalist, I used to rail on, hey, you shouldn't let these young arms go that deep into games. I've kind of cooled on that a little bit just because I think you have to understand that every arm is a little bit different. Every situation's a little bit different. But do you have any concern? Well, we're not going to worry about long term because that's really difficult to project. But just like Cade Anderson's got to pitch again this weekend. He's got to pitch a bunch more times for LSU this weekend.
Yeah.
Was it the smartest thing to do to push him to 135 pitches?
I don't know. I don't think it was the smartest thing to do. I think it's a little bit more defensible because defensible. I don't even know that's a word. You can defend it a little bit more just because they had eight days before his next start.
Right. This is a Thursday,
7 or 6.
and the Auburn series starts on Friday, so he gets an extra day.
And to their and also to their defense, like his velocity was more or less the same once you got into the 8th and the 9th inning, and the stuff was just as crisp. It wasn't like he was losing ticks on his stuff, like we've seen with Anthony Ianson at times. So it wasn't like it seemed there wasn't like noticeable signs of fatigue with his performance at the end, but at the same time, like this guy had Tommy John surgery as a junior, not even a senior in high school, as a junior in high school. Like it's not like his body is. It's not like he's proven to be like a super Iron Man out there. So, and I mean, I talked about this with Chris Martin a little bit yesterday for an upcoming story, and he said that, and a lot of other people have said this too, where past injury is the best predictor for future injury, right? And when you're and then after 2 years later, the guy's throwing 135 pitches in a regular season game when there's still 2 months of the season left. Like that's got to be at least somewhat of a concern. Like there's no other way to get around that fact, right?
Right. And I mean, you can sit here and say, well, his velocity didn't go down, but when adrenaline's going and you're in a rhythm, and like I don't know, the effects typically are either the next few weeks or the next few months or the next few years where, is the stress on the elbow going to cause a re-injury? And so I do worry about that. But it was, look, you ask Cade, he's not going to take himself out of the game.
Yeah.
Like it has to be one of the coaches say, hey, this isn't the smartest thing to do. And they didn't do that. And obviously for this weekend, it worked wonders because it allowed them. And that, let's talk about the rest of the pitching staff. Everything worked out exactly as Jay Johnson would have drawn it up. Anthony Ianson, what do you do? 5 2/3?
It's 5 2/3.
5 2/3 on Friday. LSU's got a big lead. They turn to Kason Evans. He slams the door on Oklahoma on that day. And then on Sunday, Chase Shores goes 5 innings, and Zach Ewing comes in and pitches the last 4 innings. And that's what these guys do. They're really good at it. And there was a couple of nervy moments for Cowan at the end of that game Saturday, but ultimately the guys get it done again.
Game tying run was at second base in that last game. But to sort of get back to Friday, I thought Anthony Ianson was solid. He said he didn't have his best slider, and it didn't seem like he used that pitch a whole ton, even though it's very tough to tell the difference between a slider and a splitter, because both pitches have a pretty similar movement profile. And really the only way to tell the difference is if you look at the spin rates, and I don't get access to the spin rates. This is in Major League Baseball. So you would just dig into those. Yeah, if we had Baseball Savant, but for college baseball, my goodness. And we do for like one or maybe 2 or 3 games a year because they play in a major league park, and then we get the access to all that sort of stuff. So I have 1 game of data from this year for the DBU game from earlier. But anyway, so I thought he was solid. And I think like the relative weakness like of the Oklahoma offense probably showed the most in that game because LSU was able to drive a couple balls out and hit the ball pretty consistently and generate consistent at bats. And I even thought like the Oklahoma starter Kate Crossland, despite his ERA, was actually pretty decent in that game. But Oklahoma threatened like a decent amount of times and they just couldn't really punch it through with runners in scoring position. I think they were like, I don't know. I don't think they were hitting more than 200 with runners in scoring position for the entire series. Like they really did not do a good job of trying to capitalize on their opportunities, and they had a few, especially in that game. So yeah, I thought like I'll say this though, with Anthony and with Chase, like they both look better now and are pitching better now than they did in the first 2 weeks of the season. I don't think there's much of there's no argument to say otherwise, right? I mean, both those two guys struggled in starts against, and they both kind of struggled against Missouri, and so far that's been the worst team in the SEC, as we all kind of predicted
by a long margin.
Yes.
I mean, but what Arkansas did to Missouri this weekend was like
cruel,
borderline cruel.
Yes. Like you felt bad for them by the end of it, and I think both those guys have gotten better actually as we've gone throughout the year. And I thought like they kind of had similar-ish performances against Texas, but like Texas is too good to sort of get away with those sort of performances. They had similar performances against a better team, so by that logic, they were maybe a tad better, even if the result was the same, if that makes sense. And then against Mississippi State, Ianson obviously takes a big step forward, doesn't give up any earned runs. Shores looks good for, I'd say, 3 of his 4 innings. The one inning that wasn't very good with the 4 innings he gave up in the second inning against Mississippi State. And then this week, obviously, both guys don't give up an earned run. For Ianson, again, like I said, it was kind of the command. He threw a couple nice curveballs. I thought his splitter was pretty good. And then for Chase, on the other hand, I don't know. I thought he's doing a slightly better job of locating on the inner half of the plate. And that's a pretty key thing for him, because you can't let guys feel really comfortable in the box and just expect, outside fastball, outside slider, because, they can, not only can they reach that pitch, they're also expecting it. And since Chase's fastball doesn't have a ton of movement, he needs to sort of go to his sinker and his slider to get either swings and misses or weak contact. And the fastball is almost more of a setup pitch for him. So I think that this week was a good step forward in the right direction for him, and just in terms of his performance. I think like the result of not giving up any earned runs, like, I mean, it's hard. Again, it's like with the weather that day, it is hard. It is really, really hard to see what's fact and what's fiction.
Right, but throw strikes, don't give him anything.
Yeah.
Let him hit into that wind.
Yeah, the strikes is the one thing that's been kind of an issue. I think he walked like 4 batters in that game, and that's what kind of got him into a little bit of trouble despite the weather that was helping him out. So if he just threw strikes, he would have been even more dominant, I thought.
Yeah,
so.
And that's the thing that worries you a little bit. But I don't know. Not every pitcher is going to be comfortable in those conditions either. So we don't know how the weather was affecting him. But, before we move on to this week, Koki, a word on the offense. Obviously not great, but when you look at it in context, the weather on Saturday, they were facing Kyson Witherspoon, who's a first round draft prospect on Thursday. So conditions were tough. And then the other game on Friday, they obviously hit very well. So I don't know that there's anything to be concerned about with this offense performance, even though it wasn't quite what they've been doing.
Yeah, the weather thing works both ways. Yeah. And what I mean when I say that, where like from my tone of voice, it sounds like I'm being a little bit more critical on the pitchers than I quote unquote should be, right? Because of how fantastic the performance was. And it was a great performance. I'm not trying to like totally take that away from him, but like the weather definitely played a factor in it. And it also played it, but on the flip side, right, it played a factor for the offense as well. And
sure,
like, to getting the 3 runs was going to be a chore in that last game, especially, and they got there, so good for them. And then they were facing one of the best pitchers in the country in the first game, so it was going to be tough to score runs in that game as well. And they got 2 runs. They got him out by the start of the 7th inning. He got through 6 full, and I think he gave up like a double, and they took him out. And then Witherspoon, he's really good. Like that fastball's got life. It's mid to upper 90s. He's got a really good slider / cutter situation going on. And I thought Jared Jones had an absolutely massive hit at one point. It was a 3-2 count. They needed to run the score, and then he just pokes a single the other way to give LSU the 1-0 lead. On a 3-2 count against one of the best pitchers in the country, and in a situation where he could only hit that ball like that because it was a pretty well spotted 3-2 pitch, off speed pitch, outer half, borderline strike, the sort of pitch that he would have swung and missed at for the last 2 years.
Yeah, great piece of hitting.
Yeah, just a great piece of hitting. So you saw enough of that this week to not be worried about the offensive ball at all. And they also exploded in that middle game for 10 runs. Granted, 4 of those were against a guy who's barely a pitcher. That's what, as I was told afterwards, where the last guy wasn't really a weekend sort of arm for them, but they still scored 6 before that. They still drove the ball out of the ballpark, which was a good sign in tough weather. And Oklahoma's strength, it's not their hitting, but their pitching's pretty good. So it was going to be somewhat of a challenge for the offense, especially when you combine that with the weather. They did enough to win. And one of the strengths of this team in general is if one side of the ball isn't 100% doing what you think it should be doing or what it has done this season, the other side of the ball picks them up. Yeah. And you saw that again this weekend. This weekend was about the pitching. And then, last weekend, for example, on that Saturday game at 2 a.m., 1 a.m., whatever, right? It was 17-8 game, right? And the offense picked up the pitching. So that's a pretty good sign. That tells you that you have a well-rounded team that understands when to turn it on, when they need to turn it on. So,
and the end result, they're 30-3, 10-2 in the SEC. We will turn the page and talk about what's coming up this week. But first, we owe you a quick 30-second break here on the LSU Sports Insider Podcast.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. With quick picks, you can tap right into pre-built, ready-to-bet parlays right from the home screen. And if you miss tip-off, no worries. You can play same-game parlays live during the action. Plus, it's never been easier to find and bet on the biggest matchups of the day, so you can keep up with all the action. Caesars Sportsbook, proud partner of the NBA and the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards. Download it today.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider. We encourage you to subscribe to the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. We got men's basketball transfer portal stuff yesterday. We're doing baseball today. We'll do some spring football recaps next week. You never know what you're going to get, but we are going to cover it all. So subscribe to the channel, sign up for notifications, and while you're at it, hit the like button and leave your comments. We'd love you to kind of live on YouTube. These videos are available on Facebook. Also audio only version on podcast, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, if that is better for you, but trying to grow the YouTube channel. So get over there, tell your friends about it, and let's let that be our home. So turning the page here for LSU baseball, as I mentioned before the break, 30-3, 10-2 in the SEC. Now they do have a trip to Thibodaux, Louisiana tonight. Their only road midweek game, I think, kind of strange, unless you count Dallas Baptist, which was sort of that was a whole week of baseball in Texas. But this is every other, they're playing basically every other state school. They're all at home except for this one. They played Nichols twice, and it's a home and home. This is the road game. So LSU has to take care of that, and midweek games are weird, but we'd expect them to take care of that. Then they go to Auburn on Friday, Koki, and Auburn is another one of these SEC teams where you're before the year, you're well, they're second tier. And maybe they are, but second tier in the SEC is still pretty damn good.
Yeah. They're the number 11 team in the country right now per D1 baseball. They're coming off a pretty impressive series victory over an Alabama team that we thought was pretty good. I mean, this Alabama team they beat Oklahoma in a series just recently. They gave Tennessee a decent run for their money, even though they ended up losing that series. They're the only other team other than Texas A&M, which, I mean, maybe we can touch on that briefly. Texas A&M blowing the doors off Tennessee after getting absolutely smashed in the first game.
Let's do that real quick. Let's take a
crazy.
A bigger look at the SEC here, because we mentioned Arkansas, which is just hitting the cover off the ball. They're 11-1. Texas is 11-1. Then you have LSU at 10-2. Then you have Tennessee at 9-3. And then it drops off a little bit. I guess Georgia's 8-4. They got swept by Texas this weekend. Ole Miss is 8-4. Alabama's 7-5. Vandy's 7-5. Auburn's 6-6. As I'm looking here. So those are your teams at 500 or above. And LSU's already played Texas. They still have to play Tennessee and Arkansas, both of which they get at home. Texas A&M, they're not going to win the SEC. They buried themselves too big of a hole.
Yeah.
But they remind me a little bit of LSU last year, where everything was terrible, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, they're not bad. They're going to beat some teams.
Yeah. We know they have the talent, right?
Yeah.
I know not having Gavin Grohovac hurts for them offensively, but it didn't hurt them too badly this weekend when they were hitting the cover off the ball and to the point where they're literally run-ruling Tennessee in their own ballpark to finish off a series victory. Granted, they didn't hit Liam Doyle. No one's hit Liam Doyle this season. But after that, it was a very, very impressive performance from them. Because we know they have the bats. I mean, this team was a win away from winning the College World Series last year, and they brought back a very similar team with some additions out of the portal. So they're dangerous, and I think. At this point, there's some of these teams at the bottom, you can kind of stick a fork in them. Like Florida's 1-11. They have a ton of injuries. At this point, you can probably stick a fork in them, right? South Carolina lost this series to Mississippi State, and kind of a loser goes home series between two 1-win SEC teams. State won the series. State at least has a chance now. South Carolina, it's gonna be tough to see them really be in the picture at all. Missouri, we've already mentioned them.
Missouri started the season with a fork in them.
Yeah. So, but out of all those teams, again, like A&M kind of needed to win this series to keep their season alive, and they did. And you got to give them credit, and they have the talent to do it. And they still have a tough schedule ahead. They got Arkansas, they have LSU, as we mentioned, but. They're going to be a team that's going to be very, very interesting to keep an eye on because they definitely have pitching. The pitching's actually been pretty solid for them this season, but it's just about the offense for them. It's all about the offense, all about their defense as well. Just feeling the baseball. They've not done a good job of that this season, but if they can do those two things at the level that they should be doing them at, not saying that they need to exceed their talent level, which they could also do that as well. If they can just play at the level that we thought they could, they won't only make the tournament, but they could just be a very, very dangerous team and the sort of 2 or 3 seed that no one wants to play against.
Right. Like LSU was last year. So LSU has a stretch coming up where they have 3 of 4 weekend series at home, the only exception being at Texas A&M. So it'll be interesting to follow them. It seems anecdotally to me like there have been more sweeps in SEC play than normal this year. And that's why you see, like, usually, I mean, yes, there are teams that are better than others, but usually even the teams at the bottom are, okay, they're 4-8, they're 3-9, they pick off a game here or there, and you come out of those series saying, okay, it's an SEC series, we took 2 out of 3, we're happy with that. And then the top is more like teams that are 9-3, 8-4. This year we're seeing the polar opposite. You got your 2 11-1s and a 10-2 at the top. You got some 2-10s and 1-11s and 0-12s at the bottom. Like it has been more of a, if you're playing one of those teams, you want to sweep them.
It's been very polarizing, which is not what I expected at all heading into the season. I thought, like, especially Florida, but also even the South Carolinas and the Mississippi States of the world, I thought they would be more competitive this season. I thought, like, Texas A&M obviously would be way more competitive than they've been, and that just hasn't been the case. And on the flip side of that, like, who would have thought Texas would be 11-1 right now? That blows my mind. Who would have thought they would sweep Georgia? Like, LSU has handed them their only SEC loss, which is just mind-blowing to me.
And Texas has handed LSU its only 2 SEC losses.
So that's also my, like, I forgot who. I forgot the stat exactly, but it's been a long time since LSU has swept 3 of their first 4 series, and they haven't done this under the Jay Johnson era. They're off to one of their better starts in the Jay Johnson era, and they're not even in first.
Yeah, they're in third place.
Tied for first. They're in third. So it tells you just how, like, polarizing these things have been, and tells you how important, like a series sweep over a team that's more in the middle, like Oklahoma is, like how important that was, or how important a weekend is like this, where you kind of need to win this Auburn series if you want to keep pace with the top of the SEC, in my opinion. Because if they don't, then you still got Tennessee, Arkansas, and then you're really putting a lot of chips into that basket.
That brings us to Auburn, and I agree with you. Like, LSU's in great shape to be a top 8 seed. They're in great shape. I mean, they've got some margin for error. They could probably lose 5-6 times the rest of the year and still be in that spot, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
They've got plenty of margin for error as far as that goes. But if you want to win the SEC regular season, which I think Jay Johnson does, that was kind of the box they didn't check 2 years ago. They came close. They probably should have. The game got rained out in South Carolina. It was kind of a weird situation. Yeah. They did, they came up a game.
I don't know if they would have won that series though. The pitching was in rough shape, but continue.
We'll go down that rabbit hole some other time.
Yeah.
But point being, I do think it's not the most important thing, but I do think it's in in their minds. Like, that's a goal. If they want to do that, they got to at least win this series at Auburn. You can't go on the road in the SEC and expect a sweep.
Yeah.
You got one last week.
The Oklahoma thing is not normal.
But set this series up for us. What kind of team is Auburn? Where are the challenges going to be?
Yeah, so Auburn's won 3 of their 4 series, despite the fact that they're 6-6. The reason why they're 6-6 is they don't have a sweep, and they got swept by Georgia. They got series victories over Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Alabama. All teams that are probably going to make the tournament.
Those are solid.
All
wins.
solid, borderline ranked. All those teams are ranked, I believe. I think Kentucky's back in. So those are good series victories, and they have a couple bad losses in non-conference play, but they also beat a team like Oregon State in non-conference play, which is a really good team. So it's they're 15th in RPI, 18th in KPI. They don't have like a super strength, I'd say. I think the pitching is probably a little bit behind the hitting. They do a pretty good job putting the ball in play. Offensively, I think they're 5th in the SEC in batting average, but they don't have a lot of power. 10th in slugging percentage, 6th fewest home runs in the conference. So you're not going to get a lot of power. But on the pitching side, like. I'll get back to some of the individual hitters, but on the pitching side, like, they have a very familiar face at the top of the rotation. It's Sam Dutton, who was with LSU the last 3 seasons and was at one point a Sunday starter for them as a freshman, and didn't really work out in the end. The fact that he's been as good as he has been so far this season has been one of the surprises of this year. And him and another transfer, Kate Fisher, who was the top reliever on Florida's 2023 team that almost won a national title, that then struggled as a starter last year. It's back in the rotation this year. He's been better than he was last season. So you kind of have to deal with those two guys. And they throw a lot of strikes, like, not just the starters, but also the relievers. This team does not walk a lot of people, so you better be ready to swing the stick this weekend against Auburn. So then offensively, the bases of the lineup are revolve around a couple of guys that they've had for a while. Ike Irish and Cooper McMurray, both those guys have 7 homers, so pretty solid middle of the order contributors. And again, they're not a very physical lineup, but they put the ball in play a lot, so it's going to be tough to generate a ton of swing and miss. So that's going to be kind of an interesting matchup, right? Because LSU's pitching staff, their strength is getting the strikeout. I think they still lead the SEC in strikeouts, and they're 2nd in the country in total strikeouts. Wake Forest is the only team that's ahead of them. Yeah. That's going to be a really interesting matchup to watch, and it's going to be, again, a very interesting weekend. And I don't think this Auburn team is like that much better than Oklahoma. They're probably about the same in terms of quality of team. If you just look at the statistics, you look at the teams on paper, you look at the results on the field, even SC records are pretty similar. So I think they could sweep this weekend, and I think they should really. I think they need a series victory if they want to keep pace at the top of the league. And it may be like, I think like in years past, right? Like the road to getting a top 8 seed has been getting 20-ish wins in conference play. Maybe that's not enough this year, just because of how like top heavy and bottom heavy the SEC is this season, and the fact that we have 16 teams instead of 14. So that's going to be really something interesting to keep an eye out for, and that's why a series victory this weekend is really important before we head back home and play Auburn.
Yeah, I just
Alabama.
I think math-wise, there can't be more than 4 or 5 teams that get to 20 wins. It's just not going to work. They play each other too much, like
But they also miss, like, LSU doesn't play Georgia.
But LSU is going to play Arkansas and Tennessee here coming up.
That's true.
We'll see. We'll see how it. And I just think the law of baseball averages, teams are going to start to drop games here and there. Like these sweeps just can't.
That's
continue.
true.
I just don't think they can. And we'll see if they do for LSU. I like the way you put it with Auburn. They don't have a Cunningham or like the stud pitcher that you're necessarily scared of. They don't have these hitters that you're like, oh, you got to look at. But they do the hidden things well. Their pitchers don't walk a lot of guys, and their batters don't strike out a lot. I mean, that makes you difficult to play against. And so LSU is going to have to play well to win this series.
Yeah, absolutely. Like kind of like you said. I mean, they're also very good defensively. I think they're like fifth in fielding percentage, just a hair ahead of LSU.
If you're just casually paying attention, you may not notice, and you're like, well, why is Auburn good? Their roster doesn't. It's those, Their batters aren't striking out. They're making the pitchers work. They're putting the ball in play. Their defense plays well when you put the ball in play. And their pitchers don't walk anybody, and so you have to earn everything. So I think it could be tough. I wouldn't be surprised at all. In fact, I'll go ahead and pick right now. Auburn's going to win at least one of these games. I mean, a sweep is just not likely in this situation.
It's hard.
But it's very difficult to do. And if LSU does it, that is a feather in the cap, boy. And then they're going into a stretch where 3 of the next 4 series are at home. You end with at South Carolina, who's 1-11. Like, if you could sweep this series, you're really setting yourself up for something.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And say they lose a game, right? So then at the halfway point of conference play, they will be what? Trying to do
12-3.
12-3. And just trying to do quick math in my head.
Take that every day of the week.
Well, if they repeat that again, then they're almost certainly going to host a super regional.
They're going to win. If they repeat that and go 24-6, you're winning the conference most likely.
You're probably going to win the conference, and like you're
might
at least
the number 1 overall seed.
Yeah, you might be the number 1 overall seed. So, like, I'm not saying they will do that because the schedule does objectively get harder when you play Arkansas and Tennessee in that second half. But both those series are at home, as we mentioned, so that will help them out a little bit there too. So. Yeah, like I again, like if they get the 20 wins, and right now they're already at 10, so if they can win 10 of their next,
well, you got 6 series left,
10 of the next 18 games.
If you just won every series 2 out of 3, which is, you can't just assume you're going to do that, but that's 22 wins, and maybe one of those series you end up losing, but you also get a sweep somewhere. I mean, that averages out, and that's 22 wins.
Yeah.
So that's
22 will definitely get you there for sure. I think if they get 22, I don't think there's a scenario where they don't host a super regional.
All right, so I think that's going to do it for our show. Koki's you got to go like rest up and drive down to Thibodaux, going over the Sunshine Bridge, all that kind of stuff. And then you got to go to Auburn on Friday. You finally get a break, a couple weekends at home. After that, I think we might try to do a post-game show from the Alabama series.
That'd be great.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
let's do it next week. So that's what's coming up on the LSU Sports Insider podcast. For our producer, Amelia LaCour, he's Koki Riley. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you next time.